I knew they worked hard to get to where they were now. For me to grow up and say, look, I'm just leaving Australia for another country, it's like, well, why do that? You know, you have it good here. Why take all this risk?
Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, onto today's episode. We're joined by Barry Winata, founder of Metagrove Ventures, a seed fund focused on backing founders across Australia and New Zealand and the US that is supported by a world-class team of founders, mentors, and advisors from Australia, Silicon Valley, and beyond. With over 10 years of experience across Silicon Valley and Australia, Barry has worked with notable companies such as CSIRO, Cochlear, and Skylo Technologies across different aspects like technology leadership, engineering and design, strategy, growth, operations, and more. In this episode, we speak to Barry about why he chose to leave for the US to chase his dreams, what he learned in Silicon Valley, why taking the risk was so vital to his career trajectory, and why he's chosen to return back to Australia. We also speak about Barry's involvement in venture capitals and what he's bringing to the Australian VC space. Enjoy the episode.
U12 was impending. And so I knew that if I needed to do something with my life, I should do it now. Because then you had the school certificate and then the high school certificate. I wanted to go to uni at least.
Yes.
And I wanted to do something worthwhile.
Let's talk about that, because like I feel like that happens like now as well, where like HSC is like you have to make it. If you don't make it, it's pretty much
the end of the world.
End of the world
For a lot of people.
Did you feel that way?
Yeah, I did. Because I think that was ingrained in me and I didn't know any better. Now I feel like you don't need to do well. Whatever listening, do well, try your best. But for the most part, it's not the end of the world. And I feel like a lot of people I know who have like younger siblings or who are trying to, study hard. I mean, yes, study hard, but at the same time, even if you feel like it doesn't gravitate towards you in terms of this whole schooling thing, it's okay, do something that excites you. I wanted to be an engineer, and that's why I did the study that I did. I did a lot of the Asian subjects, like your physics, your chemistry, your math, and all those things. But I wouldn't say I was any good in any one of them. It was just the pathway that I took. But realizing that now in hindsight, I felt like, well, yeah, it's kind of good to get a good mark on that, but you can be an engineer in so many different ways now.
Yeah.
You can start like coding when you're in,
Go on YouTube and just learn it, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's all these online courses as well, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like you can be so good that you can even just skip university if you need to.
Yeah.
Again, like it's not advice, but it's just like there's so many pathways you can take in order to sort of be successful. You can even make money off YouTube now, right? And you have all of these amazing influencers coming on your podcast. And obviously, there's no course in university that you say, I want to be a YouTuber, right? Like it doesn't happen like that. And so you just got to find your way. And now there's so many ways to make money and do things that you enjoy.
Yeah.
Why not go for it?
I think it's not just about the way, it's also the timing as well. Like the problem with HSC is everyone thinks like you have to make it at that time. Like you have to have gone somewhere or you have to go to uni.
Otherwise you're a failure.
Yeah. It's over basically. Your life's over. But it isn't. There's so many people that didn't even finish HSC that are making so much more money or more fulfilled in their life now compared to the people I know. Especially in our school, because our school, Sefton, is a very like up there school, and a lot of people that went, pretty much 90% of us went to uni after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a well-trodden pathway. Are your parents conservative? They want you to go uni and all that?
So that's interesting. So mom and dad wanted me to have a good education, but I think from their side, they wanted to make sure that I did what I wanted to do. So I guess in that respect, they were sort of a bit more atypical than typical Asian parents. I think, yes, they wanted me to have a good education. They did want me to go to uni, but if I was to tell them, hey guys, I probably want to go to some like community college like TAFE or whatever it may be, they would have been happy with that as well. As long as they knew that I was going to be, be able to be independent, get a good job, have a stable income and all those things. But that eventually went out the window at some point anyway for me in a positive way. But I think for me, it was like, as long as they knew that that's what the trajectory would be for me, they would be like, you should do what you need to do. But at the same time, we're here if you need any help or anything like that.
Do you think that helped you with going to the US and making that decision? You're like, well, parents aren't going to necessarily give me shit for it.
Yeah, going to the US was kind of tough. I think, so our backstory a little bit, I think from the US side of things, I never actually wanted to go to the US per se. It was, I always loved traveling quite a bit. I traveled quite a lot during university, college, whatever. And then, I backpacked through India, did some volunteering there, traveled a lot through Southeast Asia as well. And so my parents really gave me, I guess they never gave me that opportunity, I suppose. And that was because of money problems and all those things. And they just couldn't be able to take me to where I wanted to go. I mean, I was able to go to the Gold Coast and all those things. It was super nice of them to take me, but I knew they wouldn't be able to take me to all of these amazing countries.
Just to let you know, Gold Coast is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I have to say.
I just went to McDonald's, man, for my birthday.
Yeah, and I think, don't get me wrong, I went to all these amazing places within Australia, and I still continue to do that, but going overseas was like another level. So I sort of saved up some money and all those things, and I said like, hey, mom, dad, I got a passport, because up until that point I didn't have a passport.
Oh, really?
Yeah, zero. Like I didn't. There was no need for me to go anywhere. I was probably like 19, 20.
Wow.
No passport still. Yeah, and so I said, look, hey guys, I got a passport. And it's like, what? And it's like, what's happening? It's like, are you leaving us? So you don't like us anymore. So for me, it was, I told them, look, I wanted to travel because I didn't get the opportunity to do so. And I want to sort of explore about what does the rest of the world look like. And I think because of the proximity between Australia and Asia, I feel like there was some cheap tickets, right? You could just buy a cheap ticket for your Jetstar or whatever it may be, and then go to all of these amazing places. And I was dating someone at the time, so we were able to sort of like travel together and all those things, which was kind of nice. But for me, it was sort of the precursor to my parents as a sign to tell them, like, this is who I am, this is what I want to be. I don't know where this will take me in the future, but just don't be surprised. One day I'll tell you that I want to work overseas or live abroad. Just don't be surprised by that.
So
and they were like,
you said that to them?
In some shape or form, I told them like something will happen. I'm just letting you know that don't be surprised.
Oh wow!
Because they were sort of like, and they said, oh, okay, yeah. Maybe they just didn't believe that because I was such a...
calling your bluff.
Yeah,
all right,
calling
Barry,
my bluff.
All right, buddy.
I was like, yeah. And you could see in their reaction, like, whatever. Okay, you do your thing. Right? Just travel, come back and we'll see how it goes. And then, unbeknownst to them, I would say probably I was 20 and then 25 years later-ish, I made the move, right? And that story came after, I wanted to go to the US, or I wanted to travel overseas and live abroad, whether it be Singapore, the UK, or the US. But because of my background and all my skills that I gained from university, I wanted to use that in some shape or form. And a lot of my mates, they had all of these degrees and they did well for themselves, but there wasn't a lot of engineering opportunity out there 10 years ago, at least, right? Things have changed now, which is nice to see. But it was kind of hard for them to be able to study for 4 years or 5 years or 6 years for some of them and not be able to do the things that they did in university, right? Like you're building all of this amazing stuff, right? And then you ask and you look in the real world, can I actually do what I did there in industry now? It's like, it was tough. It was super tough. And I didn't want to be pigeonholed in that sense. And I knew that if I didn't do this now, I would never do it. And so I sort of thought to myself, this was like, I had an existential crisis at that point in time. I was like, I was 23 or something like that. Who has an existential crisis?
You feeling like you had to have it worked out or have
I needed to have something work out. Like something didn't feel right. Like I got to a point where I was working my 9-to-5 job, doing some okay work there, but I wasn't being fulfilled in a sense. And I wanted to do more exciting stuff. And that's a bit of hubris in myself because like I knew that I could be able to do these amazing things, but I just didn't have the gateway to do that. And I started to apply to jobs in the US remotely all the way from Australia. And that was tough. Like in and of itself, that was tough. Like don't try to apply for a job halfway around the world unless you know you have good connections there. But I didn't know anyone, and I didn't have a strong network around me. So what I did was, look, I sort of bought a one-way ticket. And when I say one-way ticket, I did have a return ticket, but it was more so like 3 months down the road.
Yeah.
And I said to my parents, hey guys, like, I think I need to make this move, and I need to sort of discover myself in a way that I can push the envelope on my side to see how well I could achieve without, any support, and see how it goes. And, I was at a point where I could come back and no strings attached and all those things, right? And it was great that I was able to do that, but it took a long time, like day in and day out. Like, I think I spent a good 3 to 6 months just ruminating every day about whether I should do this. And it was got to the
leading
point,
into
it. Like, I didn't tell them, right? I didn't even tell them I bought the ticket. Because if I told them and they said no,
that would have
swayed me in the opposite direction, because I value their opinion, right? Yeah. But what I did was actually book the ticket without telling them. I'd say probably 3 months. I even told, it's kind of weird, I actually told my coworkers before I told my parents that I would be going overseas. I even told my friends before I told my parents. And because that was tough, so you tell your friends, you tell your coworkers, and then you tell your parents, at least from my side. That was like the tier that I went up. And then, because I knew the parent conversation, the mom and dad conversation would be the toughest for me.
So why though? Why do you feel like it's the toughest?
Because, I knew they worked hard to get to where they were now, to get to Australia and all those things. And for me to grow up and say, look, I'm just leaving Australia for another country, it's like, well, why do that? Like, why, you have a good here. Why take all of this risk? Because they knew that if I just continued down this well-trodden path of, doing my 9 to 5 gig, I'm sure I would move up the ladder. There was no question about that. It's just more about, like, I'd be successful in my own right, and be able to stable job, and then get married, have kids, have a house, and all those things. And I wanted to push that to the side for now. I wanted to delay that down the road because I knew I wanted to do something a bit more exciting in my life. And so for me, that was a hard conversation because I didn't know how they would take it. Whether my dad would just blow a fuse and not talk to me or avoid me, or my mom would, they disown me in some respect or whatever it may be. So that was psychologically super tough for me to get over. And so, the friends and coworkers, that was easy. But then getting to that point, that was tough.
I think it's quite common in the Asian community, especially myself, like, hence why I never did what I did. Like, did what you guys done. I just felt like there was a sense of responsibility of staying at home, looking after the parents, and doing what they wanted me to do, which is unfortunate at some times, but I also see it as a gift because a lot has happened. And probably you felt the same as well. Yeah, it's very common.
Yeah,
very common.
I mean, I was curious because I feel like we had that similar pathway. I mean, I went traveling for a year as well, and I recall this was like a master plan, for me, years in the making. Partly because my partner at the time, she needed to get her passport, as in, like, she just got a permanent residency, and it took time to get that. And it was like a couple of years in the making. I mean, if it was up to me, I would have just packed up my bags and left the following day. I actually found it tougher to talk to, like, colleagues, partly because, especially like your managers and stuff, you sort of don't really want to tell them because that means you have they know there's an expiry date on you being there. Whereas talking to my parents, actually, my parents are generally quite liberal and quite open about it. So they were okay. They knew long time ago. But I did get a lot of feedback from friends who actually said, oh, that's something you're doing that's really brave or courageous or different. Like, I can't dream of doing anything like that. Did you get any of those types of responses?
100%. A lot of my close friends they supported me. I think a lot of them, and I think actually all of them supported me, no question about that. But there were a few who questioned my motives, I suppose, and figuring out who are you doing this for? Why are you doing this?
Like, are you running
and all
away?
Those things, like, are you trying to run away from your problems and all those things, right? And that wasn't the case. I think they just didn't understand my mindset at that point in time for me. And a few people mentioned that, it's brave of me to do that. But what really affect me the most is the regret that I would have if I didn't do this. And that was something that I tried to project out 10 years, 5 to 10 years, even longer than that. Because for me, I have this sort of exercise that I do on a periodic basis. Every couple of months, I try to do this when things deviate a little bit. I try to envision what my life would be down the road and about all the decisions that I would make leading up to that point. And I envision myself staying in Australia, not taking that leap of faith, going overseas and living in the US, and figure out what would my life be like. And I'm sure it would be quite pleasant and quite lovely and content, but I just didn't feel right with that vision, and I needed to get this out of my system first before I could be happy. Because if one thing that I didn't want to do have all of these regrets down the road, saying I should have done this and should have done that and all those things. Whereas now that I have been able to do that, it's come full circle and I have no regrets now. And it's been such an amazing experience to live in the US and live in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley and all those amazing cities and travel as well and all those things, right? Those are experiences that you can't really get. And for me, that was super rewarding for me as well.
Yeah. Can I ask, what inspired you to take the leap of faith? Because it's hard, right? It's a very hard decision to make, and also to push yourself to even do that, to go all the way to US and leave your parents behind and all the problems. I know you're not running away from anything, but still, I feel like the viewers and the listeners, a lot of them are probably thinking this, but they have so much baggage that they don't want to leave, and they just feel like, oh man, I can't do this, and they'll procrastinate. So what pushed you to get to that point? Yeah,
so I think I'll go back to that point, that anecdote I had about that sort of moment where I envisioned myself. I self-projected out 5 to 10. I just closed my eyes and just thinking about what would my life be like, going overseas versus staying at home, right? And that sort of was a catalyst to get me over. Another one was the existential crisis that I had, right? And up until that point, making that decision, I got a lot of inspiration from just people who've done similar things or started their own business and all those things, right? Not necessarily go overseas per se, but people who've taken risks in general. And YouTube was a great source for that, right? And I think during that time, Steve Jobs gave his commencement speech at Stanford and all those things, right? And I felt that was a great motivator for me to thinking about how can I take that speech and then use that in my own life, right? And I think one of the things that I'm appreciative of now is looking back is that I'm glad I did that and be able to subject myself to all of this inspiration and all those things. Obviously, there are others out there who just take it as on the chin and just not do anything with it. But I'm very receptive to that type of sort of motivation for me. I have this sort of mindset of sort of this optimistic nihilism. So in general, nihilism in this is has this bad association about, there's no meaning in the world. Life is just going to end anyway. What's the point of everything? But optimistic nihilism is just the inverse of that. It's yes, I acknowledge that, we're in a speck in the grand universe of things, like this Milky Way galaxy, but that's all the more reason that you should do whatever you need to really execute and just live your best life, because we're all going to die at the end of the day, right? As morbid as that sounds, it's actually the push that gave me to say, look, if I don't do this now, I'm just not going to do anything with it, right? So I might as well just take the risk, see what happens. If things go upside down, then I can always go back. And that was my motivation.
I think human fallacy is very self-righteous. We place a lot of importance on ourselves, when I'm a bit nihilistic in the way I see things as well, because whether things are really catastrophic, bad, you go through bad things, but even good things, I stay pretty, I don't get too high or too low about things, almost stoic in a level, because I realized over a long period of time that none of this probably matters in the end. And so it doesn't mean go out and it's just an anarchy and do whatever you want and create chaos, but I think there's a lot of freedom in understanding that, because then you realize that, some of the things that you make a big deal about are not that important. And some of the things that you don't make a big deal about, it could be the inverse, who knows? So I think that certainly for me was also a catalyst in terms of deciding to go traveling as well. Because whilst everyone is getting red-faced and rushing to tick things off the list and hit the milestones they felt they needed to hit by that stage, I wasn't in a particular hurry. I don't know if you felt that way as well.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, because for me, it was just that idea of, look, whatever you do, whatever you don't do, will matter or won't matter in that capacity. Because imagine you taking yourself out of the picture. Let's say you were to just remove yourself from this planet by tomorrow. The world will still go on, right? You know, people will live their lives, life will go on and all those things, right? I'm sure you'll be missed, but life will go on, right? And so I think that's the opportunity to do what you think is the right thing for you at that point in time. And it is for you to go out there and experiment and do all these amazing things, because at some point you're going to create these amazing connections with people, right? And that's what it's all about, right? It's trying to make sure that you enjoy your life, you do the best that you can, and at the same time, there is definitely struggle in there, and that's part of it. That's the whole purpose of this, and it's just to make sure, that's from the struggle you'll achieve happiness. But I think going to the US, that was a struggle in and of itself, but out of that, coming out on the other side, you see the light, and it's like, oh yeah, like all the decisions I made and all the things that I did led up to that point, and which basically leads me up to speaking to you right now, right? And I think it's great to have all of these stories, because if I just stayed in Sydney, whatever it may be, I probably wouldn't be able to divulge all of these things that I'm saying right now to you and the audience and all those things, because you have to go through that. You have to experience that, and so that I take that with stride.
What about the first day when you got to the US? Did you know anyone? What was that like?
No one.
So you were there just you and
here's
your
the thing.
backpack.
Yeah, I was like,
tell us that day.
Tell us first day.
Like it was interesting. So I travel a lot, like I said before. So I'm super excited on the plane, and we're getting to the destination and everything. We're landing, and then we're ready to explore, right? That's a typical mentality you have when you're just traveling. When you're moving overseas, it's different. So when I said I was at the airport, I'm an only child, by the way. So this made it all the much more harder. Saying goodbye to my parents at the airport was probably the toughest thing I've had to do in my entire life, just because I was going into unknown territory at that point, right? This wasn't just another trip to the US and say, hi, I'll see you in 2 weeks. This is like, I'll see you in a year, or I'll see you in maybe longer than that, like obviously with COVID and everything, like maybe longer than that, right? And so I think at that point, it was a moment, an inflection point where I realized, okay, I'm not going to see my friends. I'm not going to see my family. And I was dating someone. I'm still we're together now. We're sort of engaged, but I was dating someone at the time as well. And I was leaving her too. And
long distance.
That long distance
wow.
was super tough. And so I was leaving all of them behind. And then on the plane, I think that sense of excitement sort of dwindled away, and then it was anxiety at that point. And I feel like, once I land, I won't know anyone. There's no one to pick me up. There's no one to do. I'm just gonna go to my Airbnb where I booked it nearby and just hang out there, and I'm gonna meet people that I've never met before in my life. And it's up to me to figure out how to build that, because what happens is kind of interesting. You don't realize this, but all the networks you have around you right now are all organic, right? They're all from school, they're from work, they're from university and college and all those things, right? When you get to another country, you don't know anyone, zero. And that was tough for me. And that was a moment that I had to realize, oh my God, I'm actually by myself now. And I have to actually start meeting people and start networking with people and all those things. So I got to the, long story short, I arrived at the airport, had a bit of a tiny micro anxiety attack. But then I sort of picked myself up, because again, there's no one to pick me up. I had to do this. Otherwise I'm just going to stay at the airport having this anxiety attack in SFO. So I was like, oh my God, people will be like, are you okay? and I had all this luggage with me. I had 2 luggage cases, another backpack and all those things. And I knew that I had to sort of take action, just keep moving, and then, get to my place and then go from there, because my job that I was able to lock in started the next day.
Oh, you had a job.
I had a job lined up because I had to go back. So initially I got to the US, I actually spent 2 months there looking for a job. Because once you get an offer from an American company, you have to get approval and you've got to get a visa. So you have to get an E3 visa, and the E3 visa allows you to work in the US, and that's sponsorship effectively from the company. So you had to go. So once I got the offer and I signed, I was like, okay, I can't, there's no way for me to back out now. And there's no way for them to rescind the contract as well, redacted. I made a trip back to Australia, sort my stuff out, say goodbyes. And that was like a good 2 weeks. And then, move over. And then the next day, I arrived on the Sunday. I started work on the Monday. And that's where I started like, oh my God, this is finally happening now. I'm actually working in Silicon Valley, going to a job at a startup company and all those things. And that was super cool.
What was the first relationship essentially like your first proper relationship that you built when you were there?
So a lot of them came from my coworkers. I think they were really the saviors. And I was so lucky because a lot of the people that I met and the startup that I joined, everyone was just super nice and everyone introduced themselves. They noticed my funny accent, which is kind of nice. And they sort of reached out to me. It's like, hey, it looks like you're from, you're not from here, right? Tell us about yourself. And they wanted to know more about Australia. They wanted to know more about my background, why I moved halfway around the world as well. And yeah, I was an open book. I just told them everything I did. And I think that was nice because they opened up to me. I opened up to them. I just reciprocating. And I think we developed strong relationships from there, right? And then that's nice because then they give you access to their network, right? And they'll invite me to drinks, after work drinks, or on the weekend we'll go out for lunch or a hike and all those things. And I meet their friends and all those things. And one of the things was, one moment that I remember very vividly was one of my ex-coworkers, who's now a very good friend of mine. He introduced me to one of his friends, but a family friend, but who was deep into sort of like cycling and exercise and all those things. And I need to sort of get out and about because I was a runner back home, but I didn't know the lay of the land very well in the US. So I started to cycle with him and buy a bike and all those things. So that's a perfect example of one strong relationship that I can remember very well.
Yeah. So you built very strong relationships, but I think we're missing a very strong relationship you have, which is the long distance relationship.
Yeah.
Like I kid you not, I don't believe in long distance relationships. I didn't think it was possible, but you're obviously someone that has done it and you're engaged now and you're getting married soon. So tell me more about that.
So
how did that happen?
Yeah. So when I told, so her name's Jess. So I told Jess about the whole situation of me trying to go overseas. And this was, I think we started dating in 2011. And then we were dating for many years. And then I realized that I wanted to make this move. I didn't make it subtle. I told her up front, like, I want to do this at some point. And I hope that you can support me when this happens. And she was like, oh, yeah, whatever. She was like my parents, effectively. All right, Barry. I was like, that's not going to happen. Yeah, just keep dating. Just keep going. Anyway. Live your life, whatever. I mean. But then, eventually things started to happen and we got more serious and all those things. But that dream never wavered. I wanted to live overseas. And then we finally had a very deep and meaningful conversation, a good D&M about, and it was tough as well, very tough about what I wanted to do. There was a few tears shed here and there in the conversation, but I think at the end of the day, she supported me. And that was the most important thing, right? And then, from there, at that point onward, it was good because I knew that I was able to leave Australia on a good note. If she had soiled feelings about it or she was contemptuous in any way or anything like that, I don't think I could have left, to be honest. And I needed her approval in a way to make sure that I was okay to do this because I do value her opinion very strongly. And I want to make sure that we're okay. I'm doing this, but I know that this isn't forever. And the plan was for her to come over as well. But that took some time. So the answer to your question is there was definitely a period of, I think, 2.5 years. It was tough. And then, we tried to sort of have this schedule, if you will, because like she wakes up and then I'm just finishing work or something like that, right? And I'd come home and I'd Skype with her or WhatsApp, whatever it may be, and we try to communicate or at least speak every so often, every day, whether it be just text or actually having a FaceTime call, something like that. And it would be like 1 hour, but at least we need to have a cadence of doing that. Otherwise, what I realized that I think there was a point where we didn't speak to each other. I think she was busy traveling for work or I was doing something. We didn't speak for 3 or 4 days. And it was tough. Like, it was super tough because we didn't know what was happening in each other's worlds, right? And so we then have to catch up, right? And then spend a weekend catching up on all the events that took place throughout the week on how was your day. And that was fun. That was good. But sometimes it was taxing as well because, you know, you have this social life that you're building out in the US and you want to hang out, but at the same time, you want to make sure you have a balance that's making sure that all the relationships you have in Australia, not just with her, with mom and dad too, and with friends, you're trying to keep that communication going, right? Because the moment you break that communication or you disregard that communication, that's when things start to go south. So it's really an effort on you to really make things happen, right? And I've spoken to a lot of people who have done long distance and they all lament the same as me. Like, it's tough. It's super tough. You have to make an effort. And the moment you stop making an effort, that's when you start to see the cracks appear. And they did appear. Like, there were moments where I remember we were super busy and we just couldn't communicate. I was tired after work and she was like, let's chat. Like, I was like, I didn't want to, and maybe I had a headache. And then we started to have like this remote argument, like, you know, halfway around the world, and I just didn't feel right. And like, there was a lot of cases like that transpired, and I realized that we needed to do something very quickly. And that's the point where I realized, you know, we need to get you over here. Like, we need to start living, because otherwise, to do this for like beyond 2 years was definitely a no for me. And it wasn't not for me. It was like, it wasn't good for her as well. Like, I think we need to move on with our lives if that wasn't the case, right? Like, let's just cut it off right there, because it's not fair for both of us. But then we spoke about, like, you know, like, because we mean so much to each other, right? And we have the support, like, it just doesn't make sense. I'm so grateful for her that she was able to make that move, because she comes from she's not an only child. Like, she has a sister, she has 2 brothers, she has parents and all those things, right? She has a community around her. She has all of these friends. And for her to make that decision to come and join me over, like, I mean, like, chapeau. I mean, that massive kudos to her to do that, but massive also kudos to her for taking a leap of faith to do something. And she's also Asian, and like, to do something atypical and atraditional for her, to say to her parents, look, I want to do this, not just because of like Barry, like, stuff him. Like, don't worry about that guy. I want to do this because of me. Like, I want to get that experience overseas. Like, I want to live my life. I want to live and travel overseas because, one, her parents never had the chance to do that, her siblings, and I think she had a younger sister too as well, and she wanted to be a role model for her, to say, look, you know, you can do these things if you wanted to. And in a way, subtly, she wanted to exemplify that in going overseas and doing this. So going her overseas was not about me at all at the end of the day. Like, for her to do that was, at the end, her thing. And I congratulate her for that, because right now she's made so many great friends and connections there, like me, and we just have a great network there that we can rely on. And our second home, we would call our second home. And yeah, no regrets for sure.
And how many years so from the time that she got there, what year was that?
2017.
17. Okay. So this has been a 4 or 5 year difference between now and then. So are you able to walk us through your sort of journey from, you know, just landing now to sort of now coming back to Australia?
I think most of it can be summarized as startup stuff, like a lot of startup stuff. I had some sort of like opportunities to work for your FANG companies. And for those who don't know what FANG means, it's sort of like those big tech companies. So Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and all those things, right? That makes up FANG, right? And there was a lot of recruiters who reached out to me, and I sort of sort of got into a position where I was able to get into those sort of roles. But that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to be, and this is no disrespect to anyone who works at those companies. I just didn't want to be a cog in the machine, so to speak. And in the sense that I just didn't want to be in doing my thing and being niched and pigeonholed into doing one specific task or build this feature or do this debugging or whatever it may be, right? Because I could have done that just back in Australia. Like I wanted to be more involved in like building companies. Like how do you actually raise money? How do you hire a team? How do you, develop a strategy to go to market, right? All of these things that you wouldn't typically learn if you were just to insert yourself into a Google type company, right? All of that's been done for you. So all the infrastructure is there, right? So that's kind of nice. But for me, I wanted to learn, like be on the ground level and learn firsthand, like how do you actually build a company, like legitimately build a company? And that's something that I never thought I would get in Australia. And so for me, that was one of my core goals, was to figure out how do I gain the skills to potentially do something like that myself down the road. Like I didn't know what that would be, whatever it may be, but I was building an arsenal, like a war chest of things I could use down the road. And it was good that I was able to do that, working through all of these companies, because you learn so much, right? You go through the highs, you go through the lows, you go through all of these moments where you realize to yourself, wow, building a company is freaking hard, right? And so, when you're a founder and you work with those amazing people, especially the early stage employees, it's mania, right? It's crazy. It's like, I remember
fire every day.
Exactly. Putting out fire every day. There's wearing so many hats on. I remember walking into the first startup that I went into. We were like an IoT smart city, working with machine learning and all this, building hardware and software and all things. Like it was basically wonderland for me. I loved it, but I could see wires strewn over on the floors, just like what we're seeing here with the studio and everything. And
Great startup, yeah,
very, very startup-y, like.
Yeah.
But also things that, like, if you were an OH&S officer and you walked into a workplace, you shut it down immediately, right? This is like you're breaking all these regulations. But I love that. And that was fun. And I realized that that's where I wanted to be at that time. And I was working long hours, like 11, 12-hour day hours, but because I wanted to, right?
7 days
Close to 7 days a week because I wanted to. I would never do that here because you have I guess work-life balance, I suppose. But over there's no sense of what work-life balance actually is, right? Because everyone is building stuff all the time, right? Building their companies, working at these startups, and you can't really take a break per se, but you don't want to take a break because you're sort of on that high where everyone is hustling and you need to hustle along with them as well. And it's fun because you're on like Slack or whatever it may be, chatting about how do you solve this bug or issue, and look, I cracked this problem, whatever it may be, and it's on a Saturday night and you're telling everyone, and everyone's online as well on a Saturday night too, trying to do the same thing. But that was what I was living for, and that was very, very cool. I would say probably in the long term it was unsustainable. I completely agree with that. But if you're young and you're in your early 20s, probably heading to your 30s, I mean, that's what you live for, especially when you try to get into a startup, right? You want to basically build the next solution that's going to change a lot of how we live our lives. And a lot of people have that mindset over there. They feel like, and I remember going to a Starbucks, sort of like there's this road called University Avenue in a famous city called Palo Alto. It's where all the VCs are, a lot of startups are. It's just across from Stanford University, which is like an Ivy League school. But for the most part, you have a lot of people building companies in that area. And I remember going to Starbucks and a lot of, I was just doing my thing. I was actually like coding on my laptop and it was kind of weird. A lot of people just walked past me, just asked me what I was doing, and they wanted to know what I was building and all those things, right? And we just got a conversation going, right? It was so cool. And they were telling me about the startups they worked in. They were telling me about what they were doing. And I think that was fun just to communicate with people like that, right? And that wasn't just a single time instance. Like I get that time and time again, and I just reach out to people. It's like, oh, look, what are you building? You know, you'd see their swag. You know, you'd see, oh, it looks like you work at Facebook or you work at Google, right?
Yeah.
They're very proud to wear that as an emblem. And you go into the train and all those places, and you see them commuting to work with all the stuff that they're wearing. You know, that's cool. And I think that was nice to be part of it. And I was always sort of pinching myself. I'm sort of like this douchebag of me being in Silicon Valley. I have no place being here. But I sort of reflect back on all those moments all those extra like steps I did to get here. And it was a long journey. It was tough, but knowing that I was able to prove myself to do that was actually really, really rewarding and nice. You know, even now I feel like it's a really cool experience. But then like going forward, you know, 2017, 18 and 19, I started to move from startup to startup. And I realized, well, this is cool, but I don't think I want to do this forever. And that's where I started to realize, like, what's the next thing for me? What do I want to do with my life, right? Should I build a company myself? Should I go into helping other founders build their companies too? And for me, that was another existential crisis. Like, what's my next career phase, right? I have like these phases of crises that I face, but they're important. I think it's important to have actual existential crises once in a while, because it makes you question your existence about what do you actually want to do with your life, right? And so it puts a lens on that, and you have to ask really tough questions about, is this what I want to do in my life? And so I had a few of those, and I spoke with Jess as well, and we discussed it. And obviously we had this plan of going back to Australia anyway, like that was part of the plan. We weren't staying there forever. And so the question was like, what am I going to do when I come back? And I think a lot of that came from me. Like, I didn't want to work for anyone else. Like, that's it. Like, I don't want to, I've been to the promised land. I've been to sort of like, I know what it's like to be working there. If it was anything, I'd start my own thing. And I didn't know how long it was going to take, how the resources I would need to do that, the money, whatever. I think I put that to the side. I was just like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just going to do something myself, because Australia needs it. I think we need more entrepreneurs in Australia. We need more hustlers to go out there and build stuff. And, you know, for me, leaving Australia 10 years ago, or thereabouts, and seeing all of these people go into industry and just doing and not thinking about, should I build my something? Like, we want more of that. Like, I want to see a community of people who are just like, take a risk and then be able to execute. And even if that fails, that's okay. So it's okay to fail. And I think there's a mindset between the US and Australia, I find that's quite stark. And I think it's something worth noting about, is that in the US, or specifically Silicon Valley, a lot of the people there are coming out of university. They don't want to work for another company. That's it. Like, I think the only thing they will do is work for a startup, and it has to be an early stage startup, and they want to be able to drive that. That's the only thing they'll do. The other side of that cohort who graduates will just build something. They don't want to go into consulting. They don't want to go into, working for corporate or work for a bank. Like, they want to, quote unquote, change the world, whatever that means. So they will do whatever it takes, and they're incredibly ambitious. In Australia, you don't see that a lot. And I think that's changing now. I want to see more of that. It's great to see that. But I think I've started to think about why that's the case. Like, why aren't we doing that? And I think a lot of them is that you're not surrounded by the right people. I think a lot of the people that the way you live your life and the way you become the person you are is not because of you, it's because of the people around you. Because you're an average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. So for me, surrounding myself with founders and business owners and people who are just executing and taking action every day, that was inspiring to me. And I wanted to be part of that journey, right? I wanted to be more involved in, like, how do you get funding? What's your fundraising journey been like, right? You don't have those sort of conversations in Australia, right? And I think we need more entrepreneurs, and that sort of goes to the root cause. Like, if you want to start to create an ecosystem of people who are trying to become business owners and entrepreneurs, you need to surround yourself with people like that. Like, that's the only way. Otherwise, you won't be able to be inspired or be motivated to do that. And so that's where it sort of forced me. That was a forcing function for me to be, okay, I need to thinking about what I want to do next. And I need to use these guys and girls around me as inspiration and use these guys as mentors as well, like guide me in the right direction. And that's what I want to do.
I think like, especially for the Asians, that we have this problem compared to America is because America is a more mature country. The people there have been there for longer. There are set up ecosystems. The government actually supports startups a lot more than in Australia. Amongst the accountants and advisors, we always complain about the fact that there's not enough support for startups here. There's not enough support for tech companies. There's so much tax. It's a very high amount of tax that we had to do. We had to pay. And when it comes to paying wages to employees, the tax is so high. So it's very hard to attract the right people. And when you give shares out, employee share schemes to employees, there's tax still as well. So it's not a very supportive network in government for startups. It's starting to change a bit. I'm seeing a bit of change, but I still see so many people complaining about it compared to other countries.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, just on a point on that, I think it's definitely changing, number one, in Australia, which is great. You're starting to see a lot of government intervention in terms of providing all of these schemes like venture capital schemes. There's ESOP schemes, ESIC, and which is like early stage investment and innovation company. So if you're a startup doing something that's truly groundbreaking and that's innovating stuff and the way that we live our lives and developing really cool solutions, you get tax offsets from that as well, which is really cool. And that's it sort of incentivizes founders to get into that space, but also incentivizes people to join startups as well, because now that you have options, because options weren't a thing 10 years ago. Like if you work at a startup or a company or a technology company, you just get a salary and that's it. And there's no incentive there. So there's no wealth generation ability to do that because a salary can only take you so far. Whereas the real wealth is generated when you have options and you have skin in the game. And so that's what the US has done really well. They've been able to provide incentives more than money. It's like, if you join us at this early stage, even though we can't pay you a lot, we'll give you X amount of shares and then join us, help us build this together as a community. And then you can live, you can retire after that because you're going to generate so much wealth from that. And time and time again, you've seen these stories with Airbnb, Uber, Google, all of these things. These are all startups. They all used to be startups in its day. And those early employees now are either one, they've just can sailed off into the sunset, which is fine, and they don't have to work a day in their life. Or two, these ex-employees are now using the money that they've generated to re-inject back into the ecosystem. They're building companies. They're becoming VCs themselves who want to do that. And that's re-injecting more wealth. And so it's really great to see a lot of companies in Australia doing that now. And that's going to be the instigator to create this flywheel effect of becoming an ecosystem where people from Canva and Atlassian are doing well for themselves. They then start to use their money to re-inject back in. And that's really cool to see.
Yeah. Because I think we talk about this a lot because we grew up, in Western Sydney as well. And, the motivation for living here is vastly different to what you see in the US. And I've spent time in the US. I was at a liberal arts college for a couple of months in Maine, of all places, like right in the corner of the US. And what I noticed was here in Australia, even on an educational level, a lot of the high achieving students in the US, they would do their core subjects and core learning, as mandatory. But then on the side, they had at least 2 or 3 other things that they were doing as well. So it was never enough just to do the base minimum. I think the US has a culture of overachieving that we here in Australia don't have. I mean, even if you look at like college life and university life here versus over there, I don't think it's practically non-existent here versus over there. And then when that transpires that culture into workplaces as well, like in Silicon Valley, these guys, I think they almost have like a chip on their shoulder. Like they feel like they have to achieve something. And I think this is just my theory, but there's a guy called Tyler Cowen who I sort of follow a lot. He's like an economist in the US, and he talks about what's called the complacency class. And that is that when you're too comfortable and you go through a long period of peace and just comfort, that people become really complacent. And I think here in Australia, because fortunately and unfortunately, we have a very good system, whether it's welfare, medical, all that sort of stuff that, and even like with HEX, with help debt here, with tertiary education, that they don't have in the US. You know, the US is very individualistic versus us who are a bit more collective. And then what ends up happening is people don't really have to worry about anything other than getting a good paying job and, you know, and then hanging out on the weekend. Whereas in the US, it's like, I'm in debt as soon as I get out of college. And plus I've got an environment where everyone is overachieving. So like that, like you said, the average of the 5 around you, that is just really amplified on an economic and also a social level as well. Man. And I think that's the biggest problem.
Oh man, I can resonate so much about that because like not over the weekend, but recently the last 2 weeks, I went to a party and, you know, my friends, my partner's friend came up to me and she's like, how's work life for you with you and your partner? Because you guys work together and you guys run a business together. And the way he asked the questions were very like negative in a way where like, aren't you bored? Don't you have a life? Like it's just you talking about work all the time. And then I was like, and I was just trying to explain to him, hey, you don't understand. This is like so passionate for us, me and my partner. We love what we're doing right now. We're achieving things that we didn't even think was possible. And that just makes us so happy. I can't explain it to you, but the only way I could explain it to you is that you love your sport and you and your partner met while playing sport together. And you guys talk about sport every single day. And it's exactly the same experience I'm having with the sport, but with work. Like it's just something that we're achieving. And me and my partner, we have fights about it all the time, about work and about our business. But I ask her every couple months, is this what you want to do? Because if we don't, then let's move on. And she always says, no, this is exactly what we want to do. Because this just makes me feel alive. It's so insane. And she never used to think like that at all. It's just that she started hanging out with me and we used to think, and now I'm thinking like this and I'm hanging out with you guys.
Again, it's that influencing factor, right?
It's just crazy.
This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show.
So is you coming back to the US, you know, and we've spoken a few times about, you know, Metagrove and what you're doing there. And you're always very clear about the fact that it's not just a venture capital, you know, firm, but it's also like you're building a network or an ecosystem or an environment, right? Do you think that what you just said has a lot to do with what you're building now as well?
Yeah, I didn't really think about that way until you just mentioned it, but I guess that's true in a sense. You know, I'm always been a bigger believer of bringing people together. And I'm a massive believer of community as well. And I think the way that I've lived out my career, my life is through the help of other people. I don't think I would have been able to get to where I am now without the support network that I had. Like it's going to be narcissistic for me to say, oh, I'm here because this was because of all of my doing, right? Because I'm the top guy and this is who I am, right? And that's not true. Like a lot of doors open for me because of other people. And I think people have to acknowledge that, right? People have to realize that the way you're successful is not because of you alone. It's because of other people open doors for you. And don't forget that and make sure that you pay it forward and you make sure that you can, send the elevator back down, if you will, I think, and then make sure that people now, you're saying, thankful to and be grateful that they've been able to put you in this position indirectly or directly, no matter what. And I think that's a real exercise that I try to do, is having the moment to retrospectively go back on my life and thinking that I wonder who in my life actually was able to help me. And I try to pinpoint people, and there are specific people who've helped me more than others, but at the end of the day, everyone helps each other, right? And I think that's important. And I think with Metagrove and all those things, coming back to it, I think that's what I want to do. I want to infuse a little bit about how I got to where I was by bringing in a community of people who are experts, who are friends of mine, who's acquaintances, ex-coworkers, and really give an olive branch to people who need the support, right? And so here in Australia and APAC in general, there's a lot of founders who are trying to take this risk now, but they need support. They need a support network around them. They can't do this themselves, right? Being a founder is super lonely, and being building your company is tough and challenging, and then having to deal with building a company and navigating your sort of your place in the world, because you can't speak to anyone else to talk about all those war stories between being a founder. That's tough, right? And so we want to build an inclusive community where we can have honest conversations between founders, but also honest conversations between us, like me and my network as well.
Yeah.
And how can we help? And I think that's really important.
So for the listeners out there, because we have a lot of different ranges of listeners. So what is venture capitalist?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Capital.
So venture capital predates tech. I think I just want to make that very, very clear to everyone. Like fundamentally, by definition, venture capital has nothing to do with technology at all, right? Venture is basically an idea of like you're starting a business or starting some sort of, there's an opportunity and you want to take advantage of it, right? Doesn't have to be building a business. It could just be like there's a venture. I want to start, writing a book, for example. That's a venture, right? The capital side is the money side. That's the financial aspect of it. So when you have venture capital coming together, that's where, okay, how can we use the idea of building and taking advantage of a community, of an opportunity, and then fueling that with capital? I would say it's an entity in and of itself, because going back to the ancients and all those Greeks, like they had ventures themselves. How do we build a pyramid? That's a venture in itself, right?
Yeah.
How do we build the Colosseum? That's a venture, right? And so resources go into building that venture. And so obviously now it's money, but back then probably it was gold, for example. That's the fuel. Like I'll give you 2 bars of gold and in exchange for some sort of ownership in your venture, whatever it may be. And then you get a return on that. So fast forward up until maybe the past 30, 40 years, that's when you start to see the Industrial Revolution come into form, right? And that's where you start to see technology companies like Cisco, Intel, Apple. These are sort of the OGs of the tech VC world. These are the companies that really drove what VC is all about today, right? And so there's a lot of VCs, very famous VCs now that you'll hear about. Sequoia Capital, Andreessen Horowitz, right? Bessemer Ventures. These are VCs that have been around in the game for many, many years. So they're sort of the granddaddies of VC, right? But in a nutshell, yeah, as I mentioned, venture capital right now is really taking money and then supporting founders or people who want to take these ventures to build amazing things. And for me, that's what the essence of venture capital is all about.
So how did you get into VC? Because you did say, like, if we go back to your timeline, you did a number of startups. And you said, look, I don't want to keep doing it. I want to work for myself as well. And then couple that with the fact that you knew you were coming back to Australia. VC-wise then, when did it start to enter the picture?
When I started to be more involved in the ecosystem over there, you organically build a network, directly or indirectly, whether you like it or not. You're going to start to know people. And thankfully for me, I was able to get into a network of people who knew how to invest in companies. And this isn't your one-of-the-mill public equity companies and all. This is private stuff, like private company, private equity, if you will. And those deals are sort of hush-hush. It's a bit of a cottage industry in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, oh, this is fascinating stuff. Like, how do you get into this sort of stuff, right? Because that's the way it happened with Uber and all this thing. Like, there was some early stage first believers who got in super early. And then the question is, you ask yourself, is like, well, how did those guys know to invest in Uber? And how did you get in onto Uber's IPO and all those things? Like all of these questions, right? It's like rabbit hole. And so that was something that I fundamentally wanted to know. And so I sort of put that to the side and I never thought really much of it, to be honest. But then eventually some friends and, they got me into some interesting deals and I was like, just throw some money in there. But I didn't have a huge pocketbook or a huge wallet to say the least, but what I could do is just provide some amount of small check here and there. That was enough, right? And I felt that there was something there because one, it's just not just providing the money, but it's also providing the value add. And a lot of the founders who I invested in, realized that I had a bit of a background behind me. I worked in Australia, I worked in startups. So I wasn't just a bank, like I could just write checks, right? It was like, I can actually help here. I can actually help you build your business. And they were like, oh, that's awesome. Like, yeah, do you mind if we just go on like weekly or bi-weekly Zoom calls and hash it out? And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, and I had a 9-to-5 gig at that time. Like, so I would do this after work or whatever it may be on the weekends. And I'd just come in and, you sort of riff on each other about, what do you think about doing this? And what are you building right there? And eventually that started to snowball. And then that spread that I was more involved in working that founder, and that founder told his founders and all those things. And I started to obviously open my world a little bit more to start investing in these companies with tiny checks and what have you. And I think I started to develop, a bit of a reputation in terms of like what I was able to help with. But I think for me, I enjoyed that experience, like first and foremost. And then I started to realize that my day job, my angel investing and advising started to take over my day job quite a bit.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And I knew that there was a bit of overlap. I was like, oh, okay, hang on. This is not good, because now that I'm starting to think more about my investing stuff and working with founders than my data job. And I was like, okay, well, what's paying the bills? So I needed to focus on my day job. But then I realized that, okay, I needed to have a clear separation. But then more and more, I started to be more excited about the angel investing and more excited about helping founders. I was like, well, maybe that's a sign. Like maybe that's a sign for me to start thinking about what could I do to really wrap all of that into one nice package, right? Still be involved in the startup ecosystem, still be involved in tech, still be involved in investing. And so like there's this like trifecta of amazing things. I was like, okay, I got to get into this more, right? But also I wanted to also have an impact as best as I could, to be honest. And I knew in the US it was already very saturated with a lot of money and VC and all those things. What really needed help is here, like Australia and Southeast Asia and all of these areas, New Zealand. Like the founders here needed help. And that's what I wanted to do. And so I sort of used that as the right ingredients to really cook up Metagrove in a way that I could be able to create this community, but also be able to help a lot of these founders and give them a sense of the bigger picture of things and give them a sense about, this is what you can do. This is so much potential you can have. And that was really impactful for me. And also trying to really, especially here in Western Sydney, it's a very diverse community of individuals, right? It's not just one demographic. You have people from different ethnicities. And so something that I've been really excited about is helping underrepresented founders in a way and try to help them with their business or venture, whatever it may be, not just financially, but also from a mentor perspective, right? And I think there's a big need for that, especially when, you have this tradition, this Asian mentality, or maybe this tradition of like, play it safe, study hard and then go into a nice job. Well, how about you study hard, but also you build something then, build something for yourself. And I think that's really a passion of mine. And I really want to make sure that a lot of the up and coming entrepreneurs come through, be it from whatever background they come from, and then they can be the next inspiration of people coming in. And so we can fuel that and then create an ecosystem of diverse founders at the end of the day.
Cool. And you recently invested in a company, and I saw on LinkedIn post, is it Lumos?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. No, this is plug for Lumos. Yeah, great founders, great team. I connected with the founder, Eric, after coming back home here, actually, just visiting, and we connected on LinkedIn. Super nice guy, and very down to earth. And for him as a founder, he's obviously a very busy guy, but he's doing something very cool in terms of taking, technology and then infusing that with the marketing and advertising space. And I know, Ken, you're sort of involved in that space too. And I think that's really cool because that's what I mean. That's what I like about disruption. And I think it's really cool to see founders like him doing something as game-changing as that. Obviously, they're still very early. There's a lot of directions that they can take, but at its essence, at its core, I liked what they were building. So I was like, look, I'll jump on. I'll help in the best way that I can and try to connect you with the right people. But that's a perfect example of founders that I like working with. And there's a lot of other founders out there that I can definitely talk about because they're amazing. And if you go on my LinkedIn and my website, you can find all the details there and all those things. But I highly encourage people who are interested in investing or trying to help founders. And if you can do it, please do so. It doesn't take a lot of your time. And the time that you do take, it's going to amplify that quite a lot. It's going to be this force multiplier where you're able to create so much impact for a founder that without you, who knows whether they were able to, you could effectively change fate or history for them by being there and supporting them. So if you have ever a chance to invest in a company, get connected with founders, get in, because you never know where that road's going to take you. And this is sort of what I'm starting to see elements of a very thriving ecosystem start to form in Australia and this part of the world, which is super exciting.
How do you choose as a VC, as an investor, what is a business that you'd be willing to invest in versus a business that you're like, no?
And is it just to add on to that, is it the founder that you're investing in?
I was going to ask, you bet on the founder a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want to sort of paint the lay of the land a little bit before we get into this, because I think there's different stages. I think a lot of your viewers and listeners would resonate with, hearing the news like company A raised their Series A round, company B raised their seed or pre-seed round, right? So there's certain stages of fundraising that you typically go through. So the initial one is pre-seed, then you go to seed, Series A, Series B, Series D, Series D. And you can go up to all the way to Series F if you need to, right? And even beyond. But ideally, you want to get to a point where you don't need venture capital anymore. That's the whole point. Like, you need to be self-sustaining at that point. If you can be profitable and sustainable by Series A, then I think you're on a good track, right? If you keep needing money until Series F and beyond, there's probably a problem there, right?
There's like business fundamental issues.
Business fundamentals. There are exceptions though. If you're a SpaceX, if you're a Tesla, and you need the money to build cars and the rockets, okay, fair enough. Right, fair enough. We'll give you money as much as you need because it's capital intensive.
Yeah.
If you're B2B and you're just building software, you don't need to get that level. You need to show signs of sustainability very much early on, right? In terms of focusing on what to look for, if you're at the pre-seed and seed stage, yes, I think founders play a pivotal role in that, because you got to know that they have the hustle. They're going to go through a lot of shit when they build a company. As I mentioned before, building a company is hard, right? It's extra hard when you're at the beginning, at the bottom of the totem pole. So you want to make sure that you can give them, you got to identify what are the defining attributes, like what's the archetype founder that you want, right? And there's obviously a lot of things that go into that, right? Do they have the right network? Have they founded a company themselves, or maybe not? Maybe do they have a good team around them? And that's extremely important. Like, even if you're a single co-founder, that's fine. But if you can build a culture around you that people believe in your mission and people are willing to back you, that's a good sign already. Another one is, do you have an MVP? An MVP is a minimum viable product. And effectively, an MVP, what it is, it's just proof. It's proof to the world, proof to yourselves, proof to investors that you have got what it takes to take what you've built here and then expand that out, like scale that out to millions of people, right? Or hundreds of companies, whatever it may be, if you're B2B or bit enterprise. So for me, it's looking for those defining characteristics, because when you're able to find that, then you're able to figure out, okay, this founder is serious, and he or she will know what to do. And also another thing is that if they have skin in the game too, like how much money have they put themselves into this? If they're just going out there raising money, and then I'll ask the question, well, how much money have you put in yourself? I was like, oh, nothing. So you're telling me you're going to go to a VC asking for people's money and not willing to put money yourself. That's a red flag already, right? The first thing you should do is ask your friends and family. Ask your mom, ask your dad. If they don't have money, that's fine. Ask your friends, right?
True hustle, yeah.
True hustle. Ask them and validate them. They're your first customers. Like, use them as a base. Use them as a guide to use them as customer feedback. Because if you can get validation from them and you can get money and capital from them, you're on the right track. Because you know that you've put in money and you don't want to disappoint your parents, right? You don't want to disappoint your friends, because the last thing you want is to take their money and lose it. Yeah. Right? Imagine taking money from a good friend of yours who believes in you and then you blow it away, right? So there's accountability there. So you want to make sure that you do everything in your power to make sure this becomes success, like improve your odds of success all the time, right? And that's when I know there's a founder who's willing to go out there, hustle, have skin in the game, and then be able to really go out on a limb and say, look, I own this. This is what I'm doing. I'm putting my name out there on LinkedIn, on social media. I'm promoting this. I'm the founder. And if this goes to shit, then look, I'm willing to take this on the chin, because that's what a lot of founders will go through. They'll know that, when things don't go their way, they'll either fold and they'll be very public about it, or they'll fold and they'll be very private about it, right? And that's what you want in a founder. You want to make sure they have the temperament to make sure that they can go through the highs and lows. And those are the key elements. And then aside from the founders, there's all the other elements like your product, your problem. What are you trying to solve? Is there a market for it, right? All of these things that are pretty textbook But as I mentioned, those things will change over time. So as soon as you raise Series A and Series B, you already validated the market. There's no need to look at the founder. Like, you've proven yourself, you're good. Like, you've proven that you can get up to that stage. It's now about how can you be sustainable and how can you grow and build your team and scale. So growth is everything. How do you expand into the US? How do you expand into overseas markets, right? And that's where you need extra help, where you have people assessing the financials, assessing the team and all those things. That's where it comes in.
I know we're short on time, but one question I really want to ask is, and a lot of people ask this because I'm an accountant, is how do you value the startup? Like, pre-seed and, Series A. Most of the time they've not made any money whatsoever. And sometimes it's just the idea.
You see some crazy multipliers out there.
Not anymore.
Not anymore?
Yeah, not lately. Yeah,
not lately.
Yeah.
Not lately. No, that's a good question. I think valuations it's an art more of a science, because in the public market, it's very different. You have supply and demand in the public market, and it's a free market, right? So like the New York Stock Exchange or the ASX, right? The price will go on the information that you tell the public based on your general meeting and all those things, right? Yeah. So that's fine, but in a private world, private investments, that's different, and so it's very, very hearsay. So I think, initially, if you're at an early stage like pre-seed and seed, you don't know what you're valued at. Who knows? You could be valued at $10 million. I don't think so. So, you probably want to be probably valued at like 5 million or less than that, right? And it really comes down to the negotiation between the founders and the investors, and it's called a valuation, or you hear something about pre-money and post-money. I don't want to get into the details of that, but most part, that's what the valuation is. And then you put in money on top of that, right? And then that will be your final valuation. So I'm investing $100,000 into company A at $10 million valuation, for example, right? And that valuation can be derived in many ways. It could be a multiple of your revenue. So how much annual recurring revenue you have, or it could be a multitude of things about where this could go in the future, right? And then you assess the value from that. But then, as you start to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of your rounds, that's where the valuations become really important, because the valuations will determine sort of your exit potential, right, if you will, and it will define, how much is that reflected by your financials, right? And so there'll be scrutiny from everywhere about, especially if you make the news and the media and you're now valued at a unicorn, $1 billion. Okay, why are you valued at a unicorn, $1 billion, right? Like what has gone into that valuation? And this happens, a lot of bad moves have been made, especially when it comes to things like WeWork and all of these bad stories like Theranos, right? There hasn't been enough due diligence. And I think with WeWork, they were once valued at $47 billion when SoftBank came in. Then that got devalued after the whole fiasco down to $9 billion, right? So it is an art, right? You really have to work with the fundamentals at that point.
It's also like sentiment driven big time as well, right? Like, especially in the public market with this sort of stuff like pre-IPO. I'm not an expert in investing, but certainly just as someone who's interested in the space. I guess the last question I have, I don't know if you have any others, but what are you most excited about as someone, with running Metagrove that you're seeing here in both Asian, Australian, or even Australia in general? Just the area that you're playing in. Is there anything coming up that you're like, oh, this is super cool?
So first and foremost, I think with the demographic aspect of it, it's so refreshing to see people take more risks. And I think that's really cool. More, not gambling risks, but risks that are educated, calculated. They know what they're in it for, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to make it happen, right? And I get bombarded now with a lot of founders starting very early, getting advice and trying to give advice and seeking mentorship about what that looks like. The other thing, though, is really cool is to see earlier than that, like university kids, like students and women approaching me and saying, I want to build that. Like females, people of color, of different backgrounds coming to me and looking to seek advice and seek mentorship from that perspective. And I've participated in a few university panels as well as judges and seeing what they build, and it's good to see diversity in that respect. So it's really cool to see a lot of folks trying to hustle now, and they're now seeing inspiration from not just the US, but inspiration back home here. Like to see, like, if they can do it, why can't we? Like, I like that mindset. And I think that especially maybe when it comes to sort of the Asian mindset, and especially when there are a cohort of people now going through high school and then university and thinking about what they want to do with their lives, right? One, I would say, don't worry if you don't know what you're going to do. Just like it'll work itself out. Experiment with a lot of things. Work in industries, work in different companies, work at a startup. See if the startup fails, fine, go work at another startup, right? Those are the things that I want to see more of. I'm seeing right now, which is great. But I also think that if don't restrain yourself by dogma, especially when it comes to figuring out what you want to do. If you feel like you want to build a company and you feel like you want to take risks and go overseas or whatever, maybe do that, right? Because you're young now. What you don't want to do is have that down the road, 30 years down the road, and saying that, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. And that's what I'm seeing now in terms of all the people, when I ask them, like, why did you decide to become a founder? Like, why did you decide to quit your job? A lot of the common responses I get is like, I don't think, like, what I was doing before wasn't fun. And I feel like there's something more I'm better than this. And you should listen to that, listen to that inner voice. If you think you can do better, then do better, instead of having to stick yourself to whatever the world is telling you to do. You can shape this world in any way that you can. So that's what I'm really excited to see.
Yeah, and obviously we're filming this in September. So I wanted to ask, like, what you think about the market right now, obviously, for venture capital.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, just offhandedly, I think the market is actually being reset right now. And I think it's a good thing. Like, I don't know if people follow the markets or anything, but for those who do, they've seen that the market has definitely been on a upward trajectory for the past 2 to 3 years, especially during COVID, quite surprisingly. But now it's taken a bit of a inverse, and now it's being reset. And I think this reset is healthy because the economy was not just going to go upwards forever. There's going to be troughs and peaks here and there's going to be valleys and everything. And that's part of the game. Like, you know, out of this, it will be better from this. And I think a lot of the people who are trying to start businesses now, I think it's a great time, honestly, because this is where the market's going to test you. Because if you don't have a great idea, the market will auto-correct immediately to tell you this idea sucks because you're not getting any funding. There's no there's no validation. There's no product market fit. But if you are onto something and you think, oh, maybe there is something here, and even in the shittiest times that we're in right now, but there's still people wanting to use your product, that's a sign. And I think it's a great opportunity for founders to be building stuff. And you know, as I said, have skin in the game. You know, even if you can't fundraise, try to allocate a bit of your money into this venture and then start hustling and start building the product, because the numbers will speak for themselves. And then once you're ready, the investors will come to you, not the other way around, because they'll realize like what you're building is amazing and we want to be part of that journey. And that's what fundamentally should happen. It's not the founders going to the investors, it's the investors going to the founders, because the founders choose the investors, not the other way around. And I want to make that very clear. Like, the founders choose the investors. And I think for a lot of people out there, that's kind of striking to hear, but it is the truth. And you want to make sure that you build something so amazing that everyone's just going to be on your front doorstep waiting to invest. But I'm really excited about this time, about where we could go. But we'll see how it goes.
Awesome. All right. We'll probably have to get back for part 2 and then see where the market goes.
Oh, by the way, that was not financial advice, anyone. Just to let everyone
Disclaimer.
know.
That is correct.
But yeah, lastly, obviously, I know you're an in-demand kind of guy, but let's just say, regardless of whether or not you're someone who's a founder or someone who, you know, thinks Barry's a cool dude and wants to connect with him, where's the best place to connect with you and find you?
So ideally, it's on LinkedIn. I mean, most of my following is there. Most of my content is there too. You can reach me on Twitter. I try to jump on once in a while. You can reach me by email too, which is on my LinkedIn profile as well. And you feel free to send me an email. You know, obviously I can't promise that I'll respond to every email, but you know, if there's alignment and you think that we can work together, or if you just want to say hello, if you need advice, if you're someone up and coming, if you're a student, if you're just figuring out what you want to do with your life, I'm always happy to sort of jump on a quick call and help, because I think, as I mentioned, community is really important, and I'm trying to make sure that I open myself up to the world, because I think that's the whole part of the game, right? You want to make sure that you are make yourself accessible within arm's reach, within context, obviously, but make sure that you are able to provide advice, and from that, you know, happy to put myself out there as much as possible. And they can view my content on YouTube, and I have a podcast which I need to resurrect a little bit. It's collecting dust a little bit, but I'm working with a lot of people like you can to sort of see how we can take that to the next level. But those are the channels. Yeah,
no, wise. And I think I can attest to the fact, and I'm sure Davey agrees, is you are, for someone, and I think certainly, you know, I guess the way to wrap up is to say that I was scratching my head a lot about going like, you know, we joked about this last time we had to catch up for some beers, and it was like, what does Barry want from us? You know, and it's like, you are a super accessible guy for what you do. And I think that's a massive respect for you. So, you know, anyone who's listening, I think, you know, in the most positive and most sort of practical way, I think be forthcoming and reach out to yourself. If, you know, there is some opportunity there, don't do it for the sake of just wasting everyone's time. But, you know, like, I think you're highly accessible for someone who's as busy as you are. So appreciate you coming on the show as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming, bringing me on here. And I love the work that you're doing with Level Asian. I respect what you're doing. I am 100% behind it. And I'm waiting for this to explode, because you are on an upward trajectory, and I'm more than happy on coming do a round 2. But whatever you need me to do to help you guys take this to the next level, I'm all behind it.
All right, we'll have to talk about some capital raising here. Thanks for coming on the show, Barry.
Thanks, guys. Right, appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And why not share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too? Also, make sure you head over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and to receive the latest updates and get notified when the next episode drops. If you know a great guest we should feature, email us at contact@levelasianpodcast.com or DM us on our socials in the show notes. Catch you on the next episode.